Hello and welcome to Experimenta Social. I'm Nikki Pastore, Experimenta Program Producer. I would like to acknowledge traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land I work and live. We pay respects to the elders past and present and extend our respect to the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders from communities that are watching with us today. Just some quick online housekeeping before we get started. Our speakers today will present for 20 minutes each. And if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat section and they'll be addressed at the end of the event. If you're experiencing any tech issues, we're watching via Zoom. We're also live streaming on our YouTube channel. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So please fill out the email survey sent to you at the end of the event. We're excited to get started. So I'd like to pass it on to our Experimenta Artistic Director, Jonathan Parsons.
Thanks, Nikki. Welcome everyone to Experimenta Social number 41, Feeling Data. This month's Experimenta Social brings together two artists who explore our connection to natural environments. Often drawing on scientific data, their work transforms this data into the language of art, allowing us new ways of understanding our world. Lucy Bleach is particularly interested in geological terms and processes, and this is reflected in her installations that play with time and scale, drawing connections between real and deep time. Debbie Symons takes inspiration from ecological sciences to bring attention to our rapidly changing global ecosystems. Our artists will present on their recent work and discuss how they transform data and how both materially and conceptually the natural environment inspires their distinctive practices. So first up will be Debbie Symons, who is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice addresses a range of themes, including humanity's complicated relationship with the natural environment, the dynamics of the global political economy, and the effects of consumer culture. With a strong research base in contemporary sciences, she utilises databases to investigate the links between these themes. So please make Debbie Symons very welcome, and I'll hand it over to you now, Debbie.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a second, people. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to chat about my work. As Jonathan just introduced, my work looks at how data can be incorporated into an arts-based practice and explore the links between environmental data and society, with contemporary society that we live in. So I'm going to give a little background of how data is incorporated inside my work. So in my PhD thesis, Endangered Anthropocentrism, Endangered Species and the Environmental Dilemma, I examined the positioning and coverage of scientific data within mass media vehicles, primarily press, digital and traditional. This research commenced during the 2009 global financial crisis, with the placement of an article in the Age newspaper baffling me. It was a broadsheet newspaper at the time, and the first 18 pages of the paper were dedicated to coverage of the stock market fall, businesses impacted, and lots of screenshots of men in suits watching the fall of the stock market. On page 19 was a little article that documented the findings of the Red List of Threatened Species. And the article stated that the 2008 IUCN Red List of Threatened Species documented 16,928 species as threatened worldwide. It was an increase of 5,882 species on top of their 2000 report. The Red List is compiled by a central organisation in Bath in the UK, and over 11,000 scientific bodies contribute to this localised data. For example, a specialist working in Tasmania, working on the orange-bellied parrot, would provide the population statistics to the IUCN Red List, and these figures would be reflected in Australia's tally for threatened birds. At the time, I questioned how statistics highlighting such a frightening loss of species could come second to the human construct of the financial markets. George Monbiot wrote in 2008 that the stock market crash was petty when compared to the nature crunch, stating that ecology is the stock from which all wealth grows. The positioning of this particular Age article was and is not unique. Data on species, habitats, environments, current and predicted modelling of the Earth's atmosphere and our alike are positioned as secondary or tertiary content and after the main news in most mass media publications. The facts and figures are often disputed, argued, and then ignored by many in position of power. And this orchestrated positioning of science is ongoing, especially here in Australia. This is extremely interesting when we consider the Australian government's rapid response to COVID-19, where for the most part, they listened to the science community. Given this brief background on the research that informs my practice, I seek as such to explore how we can look upon the data collected on animal, plant species and environments with a new perspective. And I co-opt data and republish it within the public sphere. Data on diminishing species populations that have been published at an increasing rate since the 1970s, like this one here that you're looking at, which states that 68% of all non-domesticated species are threatened with extinction since the 1970s, 68% increase there. And I collaborate with the scientific community, and my work is informed by this peer-reviewed data. Artists have been communicating the loss of the natural world since the Romantics in the 1800s. Romantic artists such as Constable, Cole, Turner raised their environmental concerns as the Industrial Revolution transformed the Western world. Works such as this one here, Carl Ballich's Iron Rolling Mill, conveyed the sheer presence of industrial squalor in rural surrounds. These artists were illuminating the changing environment around them. And in today's society, scientists and artists are communicating the loss of the natural world on a far greater scale. The data and statistics developed by scientists and their communities are utilised within my work. At times, the shared information between the two disciplines is clearly defined through the appropriation of known medieval vehicles. So, for example, with this work, which I released in 2008, is World Species Market. And I took a photo of a stock market board and replaced the 60 countries' stocks with the IUC Red List of Threatened Species. And I fed the data from 2000 to 2012. So as the video progressed, countries moved up and down the tally depending on how many mammals, non-mammals, plants they had threatened at that particular survey. So with this sort of work, I'm presenting scientific research on threatened animal plant species within the forum of commerce and deliberating on their intricate connections. I seek to question and critique capitalism's participation in the ecological predicament through the use of data and highlight the cost of that participation to other species. I'm going to go to QuickTime because it will work better, so hold on a second. Because it's just a large file, sorry. Arrivals and departures, which this work is, utilises an animated airport terminal screen to statistically, the statistics are primarily sourced from the Australian government. And the work visualises the environmental research conducted on the effects of native flora and fauna from the introduced fox, rabbit, cane toad and Indian myna bird. These 4 species were introduced for human benefit, with the fox and the rabbit brought to Australia for game hunting and the Indian myna and the cane toad brought to control other species. Therefore, with arrivals and departures, it's a juxtaposition of cause and effect, documenting the enormous population statistics for 4 invasive species, being the arrivals in Australia, with the corresponding devastating consequences, which are reflected in the dwindling population statistics of the 245 native species affected by their arrival. So with this work, the 4 top rows don't move. It just has the population statistics or the estimates of how many foxes, rabbits, cane toads and Indian myna birds are recorded in Australia, and then using the Australian government statistics and data on the different species that have been affected by their introduction. And that's the documents, or where I go to source some of my information from. And so this is coming from the Australian government. And I, generally speaking, with my work, look at these sort of statistics, download the Excel spreadsheets, and then work out the data that I'm looking for. Use that data to inform the work, or make numbers move within share market boards or airport boards as these particular works. And then from there, I would go and have a conversation with scientists in Melbourne University, usually, making sure that the data that I'm using is used in the correct way, the numbers and the figures have not been changed or altered, because having the intellectual property is, and making sure that the data is correct is quite, has to be right for my work. I need to know that the data source is bang on, basically. Sorry, this is the last time we're going to jump out. Of late, my work has shifted to a subtler utilisation of data, with the works exploring the effects of deforestation and acidification. This work here is called the butterfly effect, and it's an exploration of the consequences of a changing ocean chemistry on the Earth's tiny but vitally important mollusk species, commonly known as the sea butterfly. This beautiful miniature species is at the bottom of the oceanic food chain, and is and will continue to be affected by changing pH levels in the Earth's ocean and its follow-on effect of dissolution of calcium carbonate. What actually happens with these little creatures is as the pH is changing in our ocean, their shells are cracking, making it harder for them to swim, obviously, and breaking down their bodies faster than what is natural for this particular species. And with this work, I referenced a table from the UK Ocean Acidification Research Program, and also worked with Melbourne University researchers to work out how I could document the change in the shell's formation from pre-industrial to today. I'll just let that play for a minute. Last time we'll jump out. So this is the table that I referenced to make that work, giving you the breakdown of how the levels have changed since before the Industrial Revolution. Earlier this month, my exhibition at Sing was at Bayside Gallery. This work was influenced by my residency at Le Verbe in Manaus, Brazil, where I witnessed the nests of the yellow-rumped cacique bird, and that's the bird sitting up here that you can see, that hang high above the waters of the flooded forest. And they hang out on tiny little branches way out in these huge trees. They hang them out there because it stops them getting raided by monkeys. And then underneath them is piranhas, anacondas, and a whole host of other bird-eating species. This nest type, when I came back from my residency in the Amazon, I did a whole lot of research on this particular nest type. And it's made of pliable grasses and palm material. And it's found in many tropical bird species to make this type of nest. We even have a bird up in Queensland, the olive sunbird, that makes their nest into this particular shape. So it's quite common, again, with bird species that live in rainforest areas, tropical rainforest areas. During the last 30 years, many of these regions have witnessed an explosion of deforestation. And in 2019, the World Resources Institute recorded that a football field of primary rainforest was destroyed every 6 seconds. They were often replaced with rows of palm oil trees, a plant cultivated as an industrial agricultural crop that accounts today for 10% of all global cropland. So those are some of the stats that I used to inform this work. This just gives you an idea of the scale of deforestation that's happening in tropical areas. So it starts off with what they call the fish skeleton. So you'll have a road and then land will come off that and you get this sort of grid formation happening here. And this is your palm oil plant here. So with Sing, the nests are woven from the African oil palm, a deliberate act to draw attention to the rapid loss of biodiversity so crucial for the continuation of native species. In sourcing the fronds, I collaborated with Associate Professor Paul Nelson from James Cook University in Cairns, whose team is researching the plant to optimise productivity and minimise adverse environmental impacts. A number of the 100 nests exhibited in the exhibition at Bayside contained little small speakers emitting bird calls recorded from tropical bird species around the world. Emotive and haunting, the bird calls are like a siren song in the dark undergrowth of the forest. This is the final work this is it in progress, getting built, and this is the final work that was at Bayside. Sing highlights the predicament of deforestation events for many bird species who live in community groups and raise families within these biodiverse environments. It seeks to question where rainforest species are to exist when their natural environment is replaced with homogeneous environments, void of the essential elements to sustain their lives. The outlook for all species, if we maintain the current trajectory, is incredibly grim. And the data that informs this work and my other works is compiled by thousands of scientists imploring government leaders to change their ways. Earlier, I discussed just briefly the golden era of nature and its rapid decline explored by the Romantic artists in the late 1800s. In contemporary society, climate change, a product of our industrial societies, and broadening habitat destruction, now further altering Earth's environments, moving the decline of nature into regions that were previously unaffected by humankind's urban centres. Thus, we're seeing an increase of biodiversity decline, further cementing the overall melancholy narrative and nostalgia for an innocent past lost. The co-opting of known mass media communication tools, the electronic biodiversity database that I use in my works contributes to this narrative. It's an incomplete form, similar to wild nature, which is being fragmented across the globe. Ursula Heiss describes it as a scientific and cultural venture, an ongoing engagement with nature whose basic thrust is defined by the tension between an attempt to create a total knowledge base and an awareness that this task will never, in fact, reach its goal. The red list annually increases as more and more species are recorded and more species are moved towards extinction. It's the 21st century's electronic version of a Wunderkammer, an incomplete survey of the natural world. The biodiverse database also substantiates theoretical and scientific arguments of Earth's declining nature. The database is wild nature that modern society is destroying in a tangible form, with the database containing a list of species that are vanishing. It is a concretization of nature in decline and presents to its audience a documented evidence of humankind's destructive force. As a cultural form, the database represents the world as a list of items. It refuses to order this list. In contrast, a narrative creates a cause and effect trajectory, seemingly unordered items, events. Therefore, the database and narrative are natural enemies. However, when the database is in the world of new media, it can transform to form a logic that is the opposite of the logic of the material itself, a narrative. In my work, the data source explores the effects of free market capitalism, invasive species, changing ocean chemistry, or the transformation of biodiverse environments to monoculture. The rationale for the biodiverse database in contemporary society is for the most part to enable the protection of threatened species and their environments. For the humanities though, the biodiverse database contributes far more than statistical data. It is a contemporary component to the narrative of declining nature and of humankind's separation from the natural world. Thus, the endangered species crisis and recording is imperative and a significant element in humankind's ecological dilemma. In summary, my practice integrates different sources of data and information to create an emotional response in the viewer. The work's narrative implores us to look upon the critical situation transpiring in the Earth's wild environments, or what is left of our wild environments, with renewed impetus by transposing one form of crisis upon another, reflecting not only the dire situation materializing within the selected locations, but also the worldwide environmental conundrum. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Debbie. Really interesting work that you presented there. And I'm now going to do a brief introduction to Lucy. And then just to remind those that have joined us today that we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So if questions come into your head, please type them into the Q&A and I will field those to the artists at the end. So next speaker is Lucy Bleach, whose practice focuses on humans' enduring relationships to volatile environments, seeking engagement with the communities that have experience of these locations and researchers who monitor the Earth's movement. She works across sculptural objects, architectural forms, and geoacoustics within an installation-based approach to her work. And she generates artworks where processes, forms, and actions are informed by geological force and its instability and transformation. So I'm going to hand the camera over to Lucy, and please make her very welcome.
I'm just unmuting. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, I hope so. Thank you very much. I'll just, I'll bring up my screen. So just making sure it's all there. Okay.
Looks good, Lucy.
Oh, thank you. My computer's doing something strange. So that's great. So I guess, just bring that up. So just as a way of starting, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Nipaluna in Lutruwita. And I pay my respects to the Muwinina, who are the first and enduring custodians of this country, land, sea, and air. I'd also like to thank Jonathan and Nikki very much for this invitation. It's really special to be able to reflect on the making and research that goes into a practice in relation to these ideas. And also, it's lovely to co-present with Debbie. So thanks very much. I'd like to start with a few little slides that kind of foreground the thinking and making that endures within my practice. So this is the back of my father's head. I share this picture because of the permanent wave that was my father's hair. Each morning, Dad would tame his curls with KO hairspray, creating the perfect rippling wave at the back of his head. By the end of the day, the holding strength of the hairspray would have diminished so that the curls were liberated back into their natural mobile state. I was compelled by the visible energy held within his hair, the remarkable waves that illustrated the force of their formation. And it made me think about how everything is vibrating, oscillating, and in relation. When I was a teenager during a high school geology field trip, our teacher got us to place the bare palms of our hands on the surface of a massive exposed Pluton, saying, "You are now touching deep time." She would quote Heraclitus, "Nature loves to conceal herself, or nature loves to hide," and would answer our questions with questions, which was kind of annoying, but I respected the opacity of her stonewalling us, as it enabled her to become the lithic subject that she taught. She got us to think about geology not just as a tectonic cycle of forming and breaking, but as an arcane force that inherently sought to remain something of a mystery. Acquainting us with the secret subterranean realms that exceeded our vision, we came to know deep focus earthquakes, subduction zones, beetle crusts, and liquid earth, like they were the palm of our hand. These formative adventures in geology established the beginning of long-standing propositions within my practice, which include, in witnessing the destabling of form through a delayed temporality, might we measure an effective register as much as the shifting of elements? In witnessing the destabilizing geological events and artifacts afford an index of precarity that not only unsettles, but compels a reimagining of a relationship to an increasingly unstable world. And geology provides a ground from which we imagine our lives. In her book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, Rebecca Solnit writes, "For many years, I have been moved by the blue at the far edge of what can be seen. That colour of horizons, of remote mountain ranges, of anything far away. The colour of that distance is the colour of an emotion, the colour of solitude and of desire, the colour of there seen from here, the colour of where you are not, and the colour of where we can never go. For the blue is not the place those miles away at the horizon, but in the atmospheric distance between you and the mountains." How might we understand a notion of atmospheric distance? How might an artwork evoke relationships between vast scales of time, space, and experience? I am interested in a work's power to connect and enable through elemental material and substance, something that we can get lost in, find meaning in through feeling rather than an analytical distance. And what capacity might a work have to colour? If we think of colour as defined as the facility to move, to affect, and to influence. So now I'd like to share a few works which are drawing on these propositions and intentions for making. So the first one is Underground, which was held at Contemporary Art Tasmania. It was a solo commission in 2015. So Underground resulted from a collaboration with the Department of Seismology, Earth Sciences at University of Tasmania, the Institute of Mine Seismology, and Unique Earth. Underground presented a simple arc wall comprised of rammed, recycled, crushed concrete from a previous building. The architectonic form contained two mining earth mover inner tubes, carefully embedded in the friable mass, and connected via hoses to an air compressor. The work sourced global data from live web-based monitoring streams, as well as local vibrations pertaining to human activity collected within the gallery administration and public spaces. The two streams of vibrational data, seismic events, were translated to electronic impulses, triggering the air compressor to release air and inflate the corresponding inner tube. So a tremor in Chile would be registered. The 215 Illapel earthquake registered 8.3 on the Richter scale during the time of the exhibition. And when a gallery staff member opened a drawer, it would register as a seismic event. Contingent on the intensity and duration of the local or global live seismic events, the inner tubes distorted within their rammed material constraints, shifting and destabilizing the overall form, triggering a process of destruction over the course of the exhibition. As an immense contradictory object, underground's material mass charged the neutral gallery space with a silent, ominous presence, countered by the comical, if not rude, engorgement of the protruding, inflating rubber. The form's protracted collapse and unpredictable transformation elicited a state of suspended anticipation and felt proximity to data and event. Underground suggested a synthesis of body, architecture, and earth. The live events and artifacts indexing a volatility that consumes, compels, and drives us. Our imagination, our sense of mortality, and our deep connection to the unstable, shifting earth. The work linked the global with the intrinsically local, allowing gallery staff and viewer vibrations to combine with the earth's, creating a complex and enduring harmonic. In a recent conversation with Hans Ulrich Obst, Edward Glisson states, "It must be said from the start that trembling is not uncertainty, and it is not fear. Trembling thought is first of all the instinctive feeling that we must reject all categories of fixed thought and all categories of imperial thought. The all world trembles. The all world trembles physically, geologically, mentally, spiritually, because the all world is looking for the point where all cultures, all the world's imaginations can meet and hear one another without dispersing or losing themselves. So just recently, actually, just a couple of months ago, I was part of a group exhibition, which is curated by Jasmine Stevens. The title of the exhibition was Composing Archipelagos. It was also at Contemporary Art Tasmania, maybe 6 years after Underground. This project, in response to Jasmine's thinking of the archipelago centering on the poetics of the ocean as a connecting rather than a dividing force, had two starting points. One, a large piece of obsidian, which was gifted to me in my coastal home here in Tasmania, Lutruwita, but whose provenance is from Mare Island, a dormant shield volcano located off the Bay of Plenty in Aotearoa. The Maori name for the rock and island is Tahua. The project's other starting point is the subaquatic Brothers volcano, which lies within the southern tip of the Comantic Trench, north of Tahua, and is known for generating harmonic tremor, a sustained release of seismic and infrasonic energy typically associated with underground movement of magma. In making this work, I was interested in how we might feel, how we might become implicated in this tremulous signal travelling across the ocean and into the site and architecture of the exhibition, and how we might, how a material might sound the vibration of its own formation. So I'm just going to go off script here just to briefly talk about what I did. So it felt like an important thing to remelt the obsidian to create a new material and a new form. So I actually ground the obsidian and reformed it with crystal in a kiln to create basically a slab, a kind of a small architectonic slab, because I had the intention of inserting it into the gallery wall, which is what you can see here. And it was important to me that it was inserted in the gallery wall so that it became part of the architectural skin of the building. And this was important because of a vibration that was going to be sounded through the material. So that vibration is the harmonic tremor of Brothers Volcano, which I worked with Bob Ziak from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who has been taking recordings of that harmonic tremor over the last decade using hydroacoustic microphones. So then working with that data, it was important to then be able to play that vibration into the obsidian so that the obsidian became a resonant body for the sound of what could possibly be its own formation. So it was also important to me, there's a close-up of the obsidian and then also the surface transducers that were placed on it. So in coming into proximity to the work, you could not only hear it, but feel its vibration. And the intention of that, you can just slightly hear it here. It's a very soft recording. Which is pretty minimal. I'll just move on. It was really, it was very important that it was felt, possibly more than heard. And not only were there transducers on the obsidian, but they were also under the floorboard. So walking in proximity to the slab, you could feel the vibration. the placement of the work was very important because it was close to the ground, which in a way draws the viewer closer to it because it's an unusual sighting for a typical work. It's also there because if you were there, you looked across the room and you may notice that actually it echoed a previous incision from a previous artwork from a previous time, and it was the exact dimensions of that. So it was a kind of way of creating another harmonic echoing within the space of an exhibition practice, but also within the architecture. I'm also going to talk about a work that's currently up at the moment, which is part of Slow Moving Waters for the Tarawara Biennale, which has been curated by Nina Mile. And the work's called Attenuated Ground, the Slow Seismogenic Zone. So drawing on Nina's premise around notions of slowness affording an opportunity to have a greater sense of something, that could be the world or something smaller. A slowing down gives a greater picture of something. I had the opportunity to draw on research that I had undertaken in Kyoto kind of a year ago, just before COVID hit, actually. I was working in Kyoto partly with this man. This is Professor Yoshihiro Ito. He's a professor of slow earthquakes at the Disaster Prevention Research Institute. And he's been researching slow earthquakes possibly for about 15 years. The science has only known about slow earthquakes for about 20 years because they're infrasonic and they only excite the very low register of the Hertz band, 1 to 5 in the Hertz band. So equipment has never been able to pick it up until about 20 years ago. The thing with slow earthquakes is not only are they very quiet, they're not perceptible, they're also very slow and they can last weeks, months, and sometimes longer. And the research that they're undertaking at the moment is to figure out whether they mitigate or actually can trigger a megathrust event. So Yoshihiro and his team actually had ocean bottom monitors in the Japan Trench at the time that the Tohoku earthquake megathrust event occurred. And what they found when they pulled up their equipment was that there was a whole series of slow earthquakes that preceded that megathrust event. So this is an ongoing body of work which is called the Slow Seismogenic Zone for me. And so I used some of this research as part of this exhibition. So I used some of Yoshi's data from those slow earthquakes which occurred prior to the Tohoku event. So I guess I was interested in how you might translate this exciting the seismic band and what instruments might relate to that. So the double bass is the lowest frequency stringed instrument in a symphonic orchestra. So anyway, what I've done is I've embedded it in a slab of toffee. And I use toffee because it's kind of a gorgeous material. It's also problematic because it shifts from a solid to liquid form, but it does it super slowly. So for this work, this work is in a very slow state of transformation or diminishing. And the effect of the toffee is that there are tactile exciters on the strings of the double bass, and they are exciting the strings with the signal of that slow earthquake prior to the megathrust event. Embedded in the double bass is a geophone, which is then translating that signal through the toffee to other transducers, which is on the frame of the window. I'll just show you some pictures and maybe play a couple of, I'll just play them. Anyway, I just want to keep moving. So a second component of their work is, this is a photo of the floor at the museum, which has got quite a few cracks in it. So anyway, I was kind of interested in that. So I made a replica of that floor. I got the recipe of the concrete mix. And then I sent my mini slab, which you can see there, which is on the brackets. I sent that up to the biaxial simulator at the University of New South Wales Engineering Department and had it shaken with the same signal of the slow earthquake, and then freighted back to me. And then in opening up the crate found, yes, it had cracked. And so then I used a process of kintsugi, which I also studied when I was in Kyoto, which is the repair using gold. So it's revering imperfection through disaster in a material. And then the core sample, which is up the top there, is actually a core sample from the Japan Trench. So the Kochi Core Centre gave me material which was from the Japan Trench at the site of the epicenter, which I then ground with the gold and used to repair the slab. So that signal is embedded in that floor. So look, just quickly now, because I think we're running out of time, I'll just quickly touch on a project I'm working on right now, which was for Rising, the Rising Festival in Melbourne, which opens in a bit over a week. So I'm in the process of, I've been gathering these boulders. These boulders are the waste material of granite which had been quarried at Mount Alexander, which that material has been used to build many of the major buildings in Melbourne, including Parliament House, the Stock Exchange in the 1800s. So this material is what's left over. So you can see the drill marks, but that separated them. And there is a picture that I've recently took of the boulder in its natural state on Lanjanuk, which is the Jarra Jarra word for Mount Alexander. And as a process, I've been collecting lake water from inland lakes. This one's actually near Lanjanuk. So I've been going around, and then I'm in a process at the moment. These are moulds and there's a freezer. I have been pouring water every day, which is from the lake water, but also the Melbourne tap water. And I'm in this process of kind of making these mini tarns, really, freezing them layer by layer, which you can see here. And then embedded in many of them are hydrophones, which will be amplifying loud the sound of the ice's melt. But also you can see there on the right a light. So I'm also working with a pulse, which is an algorithm based on the rock's geologic formation. So it comes from the late Devonian period. So it's an algorithm that's based on a time between 358 million years ago and 380 million years ago. Anyway, I think that's kind of it. I guess I just wanted to finish the project. There they are, just waiting for me to come back to Melbourne. The works tends to be connected by a sense of vibration and being in relation, how we might feel these things, not so much as hard data, but something that we have deep proximity to, and that I think actually we're in the thrall of vanishing forms, and that is urgent and sad, but it's also beautiful. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Lucy, for that wonderful presentation. I have a really quick question before there's a question from our audience that I'll ask you. What's a geophone?
So a geophone is basically a seismic monitor. So they're tiny, they're incredibly sensitive, and they pick up vibrations from a long distance. Okay. So anyway, that's what I have.
No, thank you. So you can't ring an earthquake, basically.
Well, you can try.
Yeah.
I'll answer.
So yeah, Debbie, can you join us too? Because for the Q&A. So there's a question to you, Lucy, from Anna Munster. She says, I really liked your articulation of data and event as necessarily intertwined, and of the importance of finding ways for this to be registered in felt ways by audiences. Can I ask you what brought you to that understanding of a data event?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess it's kind of it's an ongoing thing. I think it's a combination of, well, studying geology, working with science, but also this sense of an event being a whole range of things which are about incidences that that we feel that are not necessarily even we may not even be aware of them, or they're not categorized as an event. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm answering that. I wish Anna was there. Thanks for the question, Anna.
I'm sure she is. She'll probably follow up if you haven't.
I guess I think of an event as a whole range of things that don't even necessarily have a starting and ending point. And sometimes we may be on the outside of an event, or sometimes we may be utterly within it. And yeah, and I feel that it's really important that this data is not something that's separate from us.
Yeah. Well, and in a sense, some of your work, you know, it is a pathway into being part of it, isn't it? I mean, that was sort of my, because I have experienced the work that you presented, you know, down in Hobart, and what was really wonderful in the way the positioning of that work was the element of surprise. As in, you know, the black obsidian, you know, the installation in the wall immediately was playing with the way you would normally see artworks placed in a gallery environment, as in it was very close to the floor, which immediately drew you to it. And then I thought, there's no underground subway in Hobart, you know, before I recognised that actually it was coming from the artwork. And I think that there's something lovely about the way you play with that element of surprise in a number of your works. So Anna's going, I know what you mean. In the computational generation of data, events are also happening all the time, but are not necessarily measurable as well. And I think that's spot on. Debbie, I wanted you to, you talked in the work, you know, the butterfly, the mollusk, the butterfly mollusk, about it picking up on changes over the last couple of 100 years. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how that's expressed in the piece. Are you showing that change visually, or what are you doing there?
Yeah, so the work starts at pre-industrial, and so the data is down the bottom of the work, showing the pH level of the oceans at that point of time, and then it has 4 breaks, and in between each break I have like a static sort of, remember when the TV used to go off at night and we have the static on the TV, so it has the static in between the 4 different videos, and then as we get to the current day and age where they're already starting to crack, the actual sea butterfly that's moving down is showing the dissolution of their shells as it gets down, and the pH level has changed to where we are now, because we've already lost, our pH has already increased since pre-industrial.
And Lucy, you mentioned one of your early inspirations for your practice of that wonderful school teacher that you had. I'm sure we can all share stories about great teachers we had. But Debbie, I'm curious to see what was a sort of a catalyst for your the focus of your work. Was it a school teacher way back, or what sent you in this direction?
I grew up, we had a house in Melbourne, but we spent most of our time at our beach house, which was a shack down at Cape Patterson. So where I grew up, we had echidnas, snakes, koalas, wombats, wallabies, and they were all in the backyard. And you go for a walk and there'd be snakes and all the rest of it. And so watching that area get developed and the species move away from where, you know, like literally we had a shack, move away. And it's also, I think, because I still get a kick out of seeing the magpies in the front yard. I just enjoy their societies and how they communicate each other and their families. And I'm just, I suppose, deep down, just really passionate about trying to protect the remaining species that we do have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you feel like, given both of you in very different ways are trying to connect audiences emotionally to what I think is quite overwhelming sometimes, the kind of data that we live in, that world where data is coming everywhere. And so one of the challenges, I think, is not only to make meaning, but actually gain wisdom and knowledge from all of that data. Certainly my own personal experience of the impact on me personally of the COVID pandemic was that I became much more attuned to my local environment. Do you think that's going to change for it? And this is a question to both of you. Is that impacting your thinking around your own practice and how you will connect with audiences?
I'm not too sure. I think I've had a pretty significant shift. The sea butterfly was a big shift for me. I think the earlier works were probably based out of a bit of anger in there, co-opting a whole lot of data and mass media communication tools.
Yep.
And so the work that I showed at Bayside was really emotive. It was quite a poetic work, and you were very immersed in that environment. It was made during COVID. I sat there and weaved for weeks on end those nests, and so for me, I'm trying to create works now that touches people's emotions more. So it's probably a bit softer, and maybe the COVID and getting people in touch with nature, because people were talking about hearing bird noises and seeing the local species around them. Hopefully we have slowed down a little bit and starting to realize what is around us.
Yeah. And Lucy?
I think a couple of things. I mean, just personally within my practice, it was an extraordinary time, as Debbie is talking about, to slow down, to actually kind of really enjoy teasing something out, which may affect then what you actually do decide to share, and then possibly think more laterally or have more latitude about how you then share it. I guess I'm interested in that. I'm very interested in thinking about a range of ways that I might like to share a work possibly that I haven't done before.
You mean in terms of different contexts, like maybe not the gallery, other contexts? Is that what you mean about how you share it?
Yeah, and it could be a spatial thing about how that's experienced, but I think it's also maybe an incremental thing as well. So maybe a work actually exists over a very long duration across a whole range of places, and maybe you actually experience it in increments, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity to experience all of those over a long time. So there's just a different kind of absorption of it.
Yeah,
so it's not all in one hit.
Yeah.
I think that's what the time over COVID got me thinking about that more.
I love that idea. I mean, that's a direct challenge to the way, the presentation practices, really, but which is why it's a really interesting idea. Look, we're almost out of time, but there's a question that's come through, and I'm interested in this too, where I'm curious, this is from Bianca, I'm curious to know how you approach new researchers to inform your projects. And so this is addressed to Lucy, but I think, Debbie, you too, given research and the use of research is a really important part of your work. It'd be interesting to see if you have some comments on that as well.
So I'm just trying to understand the question.
So I'm curious to how you approach new researchers. So I'm assuming this is about, given a lot of your work is done in collaboration with scientists, and I think Bianca can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's wanting to see how you approach that, given that it's outside of your own practice.
Yes. Okay. So approaching researchers and the field of their knowledge as a way of siphoning that into
Yeah,
work.
and how you collaborate maybe. And I don't, to the extent to which you collaborate with them, I'm not sure.
I think it varies for every project.
Yeah.
So just quickly, I'm sure Debbie's got some responses to this. Just quickly, so with the Institute for Disaster Prevention Research in Kyoto, that's such a privilege because I know that will be ongoing, and I'd love it to go for, you know, the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And so while Yoshi's learning things, that can trickle into the way I'm thinking about something. But say, for example, with Bob, with the hydroacoustic recordings, that may end up only being a one-off just because of the nature of his availability.
Yeah.
But I guess it's very important to be able to communicate how that data or that research is informing the way I'm thinking about making a work.
Yeah. 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 Do you find that is it a cross-cultural experience? As in, are you speaking to someone with a completely different language? Like, have you had to learn a new language in approaching scientists?
Are you talking about a scientific language?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, kind of. I think they give you a lot of latitude for only knowing a few words. I think, you know, that's just kind of a real joy of it as well. Like, you know, what a pleasure to be. I mean, I've got to say, a lot of the terminology is really beautiful and incredibly poetic, and possibly not considered by some of the researchers that I work with as that. But yeah, so I think that is a pleasure.
Debbie, how do you approach people outside of your field?
Cold calling. I'm really good at cold calling.
Right. Okay, jump right in.
Just jump right in, cold call. So the first experience I had was contacting the Red List. They're in Bath in the UK, and I sent them an email and then sent them another email, and then finally got them on Zoom to have a chat, and they could understand, because I was literally taking their data and putting it into another work. So you've got intellectual property laws there, you know, with that particular work. So you had to have them to sign it off. With Sing, I needed to find someone that was growing palm oil in Australia because I couldn't bring it over from Malaysia. I literally sent off 40 emails to universities in the Northern Territory and Queensland until I found a researcher that was working on that particular material. And then you just start a conversation and tell them what you want to do, and then work with them. And so with Paul, he was amazing because it was COVID last year, so I couldn't go to Cairns, and he was literally cutting those palm oil fronds, giving them to the forestry wholesaler, so they could get them down to Melbourne.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, the incredible support, and it really is a collaboration in that sort of sense because they're helping you make the work in that way. But generally speaking, I find you find the research that you're interested in, and then you just contact whoever's written the paper.
Yep.
Send them an email.
Yep. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Look, we're out of time, sadly. Thank you for 2 wonderful and evocative presentations. It's been really great to learn more about your practice, and look forward to seeing, you know, the work in Rising, Lucy, and